Hi, today I'm here with you, Sean Kosofsky, the nonprofit fixer with Mind the Gap Consulting. I'm here with you today to talk about another really important issue that I've focused on in some of our e-blasts and some of our other correspondence, which is this idea that people are not overhead. So funders and foundations and larger institutional donors sometimes want to know what your overhead number is. And overhead is like this weird sort of way to round up all of the different stuff that a nonprofit or a business or a government agency needs to do to function. And generally you want your overhead lower than not. But this sort of like fascination with this number being low, or that it's some kind of magic indication of effectiveness or how donor dollars are being used. For example, young and new organizations tend to have higher overhead because they're just getting launched. They're just paying for things that are new. They're getting their infrastructure up, more branding and marketing possibly. So they're going to have more overhead expenses than maybe a more established small organization. Larger organizations, those based in a more expensive city, are going to have higher overhead. But it is in exchange for that higher overhead that you probably have greater access to a network of people nearby. There's reasons for everything. But the biggest complaint I have about overhead and our fixation on overhead having to be low, or everyone falling all over themselves to explain that their overhead is like 4% or 2%, is that it's really just a losing game. What we need to do instead is convince funders, foundations, and others that, yeah, it's one data point. It's just one data point, but dig in, learn more about what overhead is. But there's a move afoot out there to rename overhead something else, something different. I recently posted to a bunch of Facebook groups asking people different ways that they can describe this. And people call it mission impact. They call it mission-related expenses. There's all these different things you can call overhead without calling it overhead. But you can read my, recent e-blast on this. If you want, just message me below and I can send it to you. But one of the more powerful things about this is that I don't believe people can be overhead. And this is my soundbite from this: people are not overhead. Jack, who is cleaning up the facilities where the youth group meets every Saturday, Stacy, who is pushing payroll to make sure everyone gets paid and make sure that all the financing and bookkeeping is legit. These people are not overhead. These people make the mission happen. Sally is not overhead. Arturo is not overhead. No one is overhead. And I find it offensive when we think about people or specific roles as overhead, as like fat or like unnecessary functions. So one, we should be renaming this category. I love something sort of like mission-related expenses or impact-related expenses. Those are just some of the different ideas out there. But specifically to resist the temptation to think of people as ever being extra or overhead. So thank you for this little moment to rant about overhead. And if you have any thoughts about this, I'd love to hear your comments on it. Thank you so much.